I sort of don't want to tell our readers how everything is resolved because that would take a little bit of the suspense out of the book. But let me ask you this, Danny. After seeing this incredibly human and intimate experience, and the way you've documented it is kind of staggering, to be honest. I mean, the amount of work that must have gone into this is huge because you have details of every single part of their incredibly different and complicated and entangled journeys across the field of conflict and beyond. Did you draw any conclusions about the Nazi regime and the Soviet regime in understanding how we should think of them both in terms of history?
So first of all, I should say, one of the advantages I had is that my grandfather was one of the great archivists of the 20th century. And so that did help, but it wasn't the only reason. My mother kept a lot of documents. And then, I did work at it very hard. I said to my agent about it, give me enough time to do this book because I'm only going to do it once and I want this to be the best possible.
How long did it take you to do this book?
About 4 years, the whole project. Which I don't think is out of kilter to the. I have been thinking about it and reading about it for longer than that, I guess. But that's probably the core period. So in terms of my mother used to have this phrase when people would ask her, about the Soviets and the Nazis. She would say it's not a competition, and indeed. The book, which in Britain, as you say, is called Hitler, Stalin, Mom and Dad, and Two Roads Home in the US. In Britain, I contemplated that as a subtitle with the title being It's Not a Competition. But actually, my agent correctly thought the subtitle was better than the title. So, but my mother's observation is not a competition. She felt that you don't have to draw some equation as to whether or not, Zsosha Potocka's tragic death of diarrhea my father had spent the winter in a shack that was below freezing inside, and Zsosha died there, in her early 20s or mid 20s. The tragedy of that is so compelling. Is that worse than Fritz's death at the age of 12 or 13 in Sobibor in the gas chambers? I don't know. Who knows what the answer to that is? And I think it's kind of like awful to even try and make those kind of calculations mathematically. So in that way, my conclusion is this. When I opened my grandfather's files, Alfred's files, one of the first documents after that passport that I talked about was my grandfather had a personal copy of the indictment of the Nuremberg conspirators. And I started reading that. And I was reading it because of Alfred's story, but I suddenly realized that the Soviets had committed all the crimes that they prosecuted the Nazis for at Nuremberg. They committed them in different ways, but they committed all the same crimes. So why did they not get the same opprobrium? I think for three reasons. First, because they won the war and the Nazis lost. And often that's how we kind of make these judgments, really, about winning and losing wars. Secondly, because there's something uniquely shocking about the methodology of the Nazis. If you read the section on Trudy's death in Sobibor, that is uniquely shocking, even set against Zsosha's death, the mechanics of it, that the forethought of it, and somehow the Soviets' death through a kind of horrendous and deliberate carelessness where they just let people die. There is a difference between it, and so I understand why we're so enthralled in a horrendous way with the Nazi story. But a third thing is there still remains, and I'm afraid this used to drive my father a bit posse, and probably does me too, a kind of vague feeling that the communists were trying to do good, it just all went a bit wrong. And so it was like they clumsily killed all these people, but in the process of trying to make everyone love each other. I think that my book illustrates how that is a completely distorted view of their behavior, that the power drive, it demonstrates that both these philosophies had similar dislike of what they call bourgeois liberal democracy. And that is because they both thought that the spirit of their country had been undermined by a conspiracy. In the case of the Nazis, they thought it was the Jews. In the case of the Soviets, they thought it was the bourgeoisie, right? Some of whom were Jews, by the way.